Hey, happy when. Oh, gosh, Gabriel. that was my. That was my child. I am not starting this again because he will just do it again. So happy Wednesday and welcome to my life. If you didn't hear him, he screamed really loud because I said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to record. Don't scream." Gotta love kids. Um, and all right, so I totally lost my train of thought, but I'm not starting again. So, some reminders on this Wednesday, April 15th. You should have turned in your lyric poem. If not, get that done and get that turned in. I can't wait to read those. Also, don't forget tomorrow you're going to either need to have your book in hand or the URL for where you are accessing the book online. And then tomorrow will not be a poetry day, it will be a reading day. Also, not every week, but several weeks you will have one of our 3 days will be a reading day. I highly recommend you not wasting that. I know some of you, Mr. Potters, who thrive on reading all in one fell swoop. Okay, that's fine with me. And then the reading days can just be whatever, a catch up day for something else if you want. So there you go. So those are your reminders. For today's lesson, you need the Poetic Terms slideshow. Or not. I mean, technically you don't need to open it because I'm going to have it on the screen. So if you want to add it to some of your notes, like you want to handwrite them, get those out, or if you want to type them up on the notes that I've already given you, you can do that, or you can just make a copy of the slideshow. It's totally up to you how you want to do this. But I'm going to give you some terms that you're going to need to use for your assignment tonight, and we're going to be using this terminology now for the rest of the poetry unit. You'll probably run into it again your senior year if you take AP Lit. Mr. Shoup probably won't spend any time next year on poetry since it's not AP language stuff. Okay, so get ready and we're going to start a screen recording here in just a minute. All right, I am going to be giving you some notes. And like I said, you can either just follow along or you can be writing these down and just pause me as needed. All right, so first we're going to look at some formatting terms in regards to poems. We've already talked about this a lot, but I just wanted to go ahead and have it in notes for sure, that a stanza is a grouping of lines similar to like a paragraph would be in an essay or a book. It is almost always set off by like a space or two spaces from other stanzas, but not always. And I'll talk about an example of that when we look at an example of something else, and it happens in both of those things happen in the same poem. So now we're going to look at types of stanzas. A couplet is two usually rhyming lines of poetry. Technically, the definition of a couplet is just a two-line stanza, but the definition has kind of morphed over the years to have to do with rhyming for some reason. None of the other stanzas have anything to do with rhyming except a couplet. And again, technically the definition doesn't say anything about rhyming, but that's what people will think if you say a couplet. So if you're talking about a couplet and they don't rhyme, you would say an unrhyming couplet or an unrhymed couplet. Okay? A quatrain is a four-lined stanza, and again, nothing to do with rhyming. A sestet is 6 lines, and an octave is 8 lines. Now, there are, words for 5 and 7, but those don't happen as often. The reason for that being, you'll notice there's also not one for 3. Even numbers tend to lend themselves well to poetry, especially poetry that rhymes, because it usually rhymes either every 2 lines rhyme or every other line rhymes, or the first and last lines rhyme and the middle two. So it usually goes in even numbers. Okay, so these are the ones we're going to learn because these are the ones that the terms that I will be using. Here are a couple more that I want you to know, and I've got some examples of these, and we'll talk about the other stanza related terms as well. The first one that I want you to know is poetic license, and that is the general rule that poets can break rules whenever they want for the sake of the art. So this is a more modern thing, and when I say modern, I mean since the 1950s. That's when people kind of started rebelling against standardized formatted poetry. One example of this is from the 1950s, maybe the 1940s now. I can't think of off the top of my head when it was written. In a Station of the Metro was written by Ezra Pound. And we'll wait for a second while it pulls up. Oh, I was hoping it would give me the date, but it doesn't. Bummer. This is supposed to be, he bills this poem as a haiku. But you will notice one of the requirements for haiku is that it's 3 lines with 5, 7, 5 being the syllables for each respective line. And his poetic license is that the title of the poem is one of the lines. So that is his use of poetic license. Okay. You can also talk about poetic license when you're talking about like slant rhyme and I rhyme and that sort of thing. Poetic shift is when a poet changes the tone or message of the poem, often signified with punctuation, line breaks, and sometimes even stanza breaks. In AP Lit, we talk about this a lot. It's one of the things that we do with every poem we look at, is we look for the shift in the poem. Now, not all poems have shifts, but many do, most do, where the poet is kind of going along one train of thought and then shifts to another train of thought. The example that I'm going to show you is this, except now that little thingy is in the way. Excellent. I thought that might happen, but again, I'm not going to stop recording. Okay, so here is Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I'm pretty sure somebody in each of the classes recited this for your poem that you needed to recite. And I think I even talked about this idea of a shift. I just didn't tell you a lot about it. But in the majority of the poem, this part here, he talks about how basically boring and or ugly the love of his life is. Okay, and then at the bottom here, the couplet, he shifts. So he just got done talking about how she is definitely not a goddess, and yet by heaven I think my love is rare, as any she belied with false compare. Or basically, I don't really care what she looks like, I love her so much. Okay. And so here is the shift in this couplet. Now, this is a sonnet, and a Shakespearean sonnet has 3 quatrains and a couplet. And earlier, you might remember that I mentioned that usually stanzas are set off by a line break at the very least, but Shakespeare didn't do that for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but he didn't do it. And so we have all of this that looks like one giant stanza, but in fact it's 3 stanzas, and we can see that with the rhyme scheme because sun and dun rhyme, red and head rhyme, which are lines 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, and then that pattern continues in the other 3. Lines 1 and 3 rhyme, and 2 and 4 rhyme. and then until you get to, of course, the couplet, which rhymes with itself. Okay? So that is the poetic shift there. So he sets it off, like literally indents it farther, and that's how we see it. But also his choice of language and yet. So it's like but, like one of those transition words. And so those are some ideas where you can look for the poetic shift. Okay. I'm going to go back to presentation mode now that I can. So in your homework tonight, you're not really going to look for poetic license because that is a little harder to see. But if you see it in one of the poems that you pick, you're like, oh wow, he really took some liberties there. Those words totally don't look like they should rhyme. Or whatever. If you find something, great. If not, don't worry about it. And the same with poetic shift. Try, look for it. If you don't see it, it's not a huge deal. I will point it out to you. Or if you want to send me your poem and just ask, hey, is this where the shift is, or did I get it wrong? And then I'll let you know. Okay. So along those lines, oh shoot, I'm just really doing a great job today. It is your turn. You are not writing a poem tonight as an assignment. However, you do have an assignment. And I put on here that you can do it with a friend if you would like. Just kind of coordinate together. The one thing, if you are working on it with a friend, you need to make sure you share it with me so that I can edit, because I want to see the version history. I put that on here. I need to see the version history so I can see that you both actually worked on it and didn't just, you threw your bro's name on it to help him out. And both of you need to turn it in, just because it's too difficult to set up groups on Canvas when we're not together. So I need you both to turn it in so you guys can get credit for it. Okay, but this is basically all I already talked about, so I'm not going to explain it any further. So if you have questions, message me, email me, or we can talk on Thursday, which is tomorrow for you, on our weekly chat. And if you hop on the Google Hangout this week, I will throw a little extra credit your way, and hopefully I'll see a few more faces. Okay, you guys have a great day, and I will see you later.